Hi there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Last Edit Podcast, a weekly podcast on film starring yours truly, Silver Hawkins, and my great friend and film brain.
Citizen Sleeve, hello there.
As you know, we take turns each week discussing different films. We each pick a film, alternating between us, and this week I picked Hal Ashby's 1980 or 1979 movie Being There, starring Peter Sellers as Chance the Gardener, in a movie that was a bit of a passion project for Peter Sellers and unfortunately turned out to be his last role. He did get an Academy Award nomination for it, and he is quite stellar in the movie, I think. But yeah, it's a movie I chose because it's not. I mean, I think actually I heard it touted a lot back when Trump won the 2016 election. That was basically being there, coming full circle, and being there, sort of being prophetic in that way. And it sort of is. I mean, it's a movie that is mainly about two things, and those two things are perception and communication. Um, like the movie finishes on a line that I think we'll talk about. That is sort of its driving point. But it is a really subtle movie, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, there are a lot of really overt things, like the fact that the billionaire or millionaire in the movie is called Benjamin Rand, not a particularly subtle last name. Um, and and yeah, but I watched this movie for the first time a couple of years ago when I finally got the chance to see it, because back then it came up on Netflix. It is not on Netflix anymore here, unfortunately. So I had to go take it up in other ways, but it really impressed me when I saw it. I think it's really clever. I think there's really solid writing here. It's some of the best satire I've seen. And yeah, it's a movie that really, like I said, it's a movie that really impressed me, and that I really want people to sort of to talk about and see, because it is a movie that has something really profound to say, I think, about media and the way our perception shapes reality. But enough about my own opinions. What did you think of it? Had you seen it before?
No, so I haven't come across it before, and I'm a pretty big Peter Sellers fan, as you know. You're more so than I am. You've certainly directed me in positions and films that I haven't seen before or seen a lot of. But this was quite an unusual one because it was a very understated performance by Peter
Yeah,
Sellers. That's one of the first things I think really jumped out at the screen. He's very reserved. He plays this quite clearly autistic or has autistic tendencies, which maybe back in
I should
19.
probably just give a quick synopsis. The movie is about
Yeah.
a man called Chance, who is a gardener, and he's been living with a millionaire his entire life. He's been basically sequestered there, not allowed to leave. His only sort of gateway to the outside world, and really sort of the shaper of his reality, has been television. At first it was radio, and then when television came out, he shifted to television. He can't read or write. He can't really form relations with other people. He has absolutely no clue as to subtext or anything. He's completely literal and takes everything completely literally, um, which is sort of the basis for a lot of the movie's misunderstandings and a lot of the movie's comedy. And unfortunately, the old man then dies, and there's no paper or anything on Chance or proof that Chance lived there or has any right to the estate. So Chance basically gets evicted by the estate lawyers after the old man's death, and then he runs into Eve, Shirley Maclaine's character, who is the wife of another really influential billionaire in Washington D.C., where the movie takes place, and and he basically takes up residence with the billionaire, and from there sort of starts mingling with the high society in Washington D.C. and power brokering and stuff. And that's basically the synopsis of the movie.
Well, I love the way it begins. So, to begin with, Peter Sellers, we watch him in bed waking up, and it plays with your expectations a little bit because we first of all hear him listening or watching on television an opera or classical music, I should say.
Yeah.
And he wakes up, he tends to a few of the plants in his room, swaps a few over into the sunlight and the shade, etc. And then just when the film is setting you up for something perhaps you don't quite expect. I mean, I had no background on this film. He switched over to wacky races. And we start slowly but surely within that opening sequence to get a sense of Chance as someone with autistic tendencies or autistic
Childlike.
and very childlike as well. And both of those things, the literal nature of how he accepts what he's being told from both the television and the world itself or people around him, and his childlike tendencies of the way he approaches things. I found it quite funny when he's just kind of sat there at the start. He's watching the TV again. He's flipping between advertising and different programs and a lot of child programs. And Louise, the maid, comes in and tells him that his master's just died. You know, the old man has just died. And he shows no emotion, no empathy, just carries on kind of watching the TV. And Louise is kind of quite perturbed by it. It's like, do you understand what I'm telling you? And he's like, could you please make me breakfast? And she knows she's brought this this kid up, as it were, to where he is now. He's probably late 50s, early 60s. And she puts her hands on his shoulders and says, you're always going to be a boy. You're always going to be childlike. And then, as you said, we start seeing that the lawyers appear, and we understand that he's going to basically be evicted because, as you said, there's no records there of him basically ever existing. He's just this, I don't know, this person who has been at this house for all of his life, has never left before.
I mean, there's subtext there that we're sort of meant to sort of, I think, put in our own interpretation of that maybe he's like the illegitimate son of the rich old man, or
yeah. Because he keeps saying when he's asked, when they ask him, are you in any relation? He says, I don't know. I just don't know. So that vagrancy is throughout the film as well. You know, him as a character is incredibly mysterious. We don't really know anything about him apart from the way he interacts and perceives the world in which. Yeah,
and the way sort of others perceive him, because he does dress impeccably. Like, he wears impeccably tailored suits, which belonged to the old man, like the rich old man that he lived with. He's allowed to use and wear his suits because they fit him nicely, and they are impeccably tailored, like made by a tailor back in 1928.
Who died in 1936 or something.
Who committed suicide eventually. And I mean, and that's part of what creates people's perception of him. The fact that he is impeccably dressed, like wears a hat and an umbrella, like lends him an air of authority and profundity that people attribute to him.
Yeah, and even the initial stages of the dialogue we hear in the little interactions, he's asked certain things like the lawyers who are obviously are quite like, who is this guy? We have no idea. Why is he here? And he calls himself James Chance at the time. And then they go to his bedroom and he explains that he's the gardener and that he's lived here for a long time, and shows them his bed and his sink and his toilet, everything that's his, like as a child would. And then they ask him, so do you want to make a claim on the property? So I don't know what a claim is. Well, I'll give you my card and you can make a telephone call to us if you want to make a claim, if you contact your lawyer. And they walk away and he just starts bending the card as if he doesn't know what this thing is.
Yeah.
Just a bit of paper. And it's quite funny when he packs his case. He has some awareness of what's going on, but again, in that very childlike nature. It's almost like Big got older. There's, you know what I mean? It's not a similar film, but it's got something about it which almost makes me feel like it could have been the pseudo bastard, like cousin to Big in many ways. But he packs his suitcase, including the remote control for the TV, because the TV is the window to his world. As you said, it's shaped who he is. It's shaped how he experiences the world. He almost lives vicariously through the TV, because that's the only thing he knows.
Yeah.
He doesn't read, he can't write, all these things. Packs his bag and he opens the door. And then we get the 2001 Space Odyssey. I don't know the actual track's name, but with a funky 70s beat.
Yeah.
And that goes on for about 5 or 6 minutes. And we have him wandering around quite like, oh, wow, this weird world. But to us, it's this dilapidated, a lot of homeless people are around, and burnt out cars. You know, he's walking through this city. quite haphazardly, and he just bumbles about and comes across a small gang of black kids who he just wants to garden, so he asks them, "Hey, can I garden? Do you know any gardens I can garden in?" And they think he's been sent from another gang or something. And we get this little in joke that carries on just a couple of times throughout the film, where he very bluntly says, "Okay, I'll tell Raphael if I see him what you told me to say," because he takes literally everything in a literal sense. And then there's the bit in front of the TV. I mean, I'm kind of bridging it a little bit, the opening, but then there's that bit in front of the TV store.
Of course, you have to mention like there's a joke when he meets the gang members and they start they pull out a switchblade and start threatening him, where he picks up the remote control from his pocket and tries to switch the channel or tries to switch them off, and it doesn't work, of course, much to his puzzlement.
Reality in TV is one thing in this film almost, and we see that throughout. But yeah, he stood in front of this TV store with all these TVs, and he's managed to figure out that he can switch one or two channels with the remote he's brought on some of the smaller TVs. Funny part is when he meets Eve. So Eve is parking up, her driver's parking up, and he kind of gets
played by Shirley Maclaine.
Shirley Maclaine, who's brilliant in this, gets squished in between two cars, and so rather than take him to the hospital, they decide they'll take him with them and to the house because they've got doctors there and nurses who are looking after Eve's husband, who is slowly but surely dying. And then it starts to get even crazier. Each situation
on the way
gets
there
crazier.
In the limousine, as Chance and Eve are talking, of course she asks him his name, and at the same time she's like invited him for a drink. Of course he's likely never really tasted alcohol.
Never had alcohol before, yeah. Just that child.
She pours him a stiff one. And it does not go down very well with him. And of course, in a coughing fit, he then says he's Chance the gardener, but she hears it as Chauncey Gardner, which is the type of name that would fit with a man of his apparent stature in terms of his dress and such, right? Yeah. And
I think it's really great.
That is sort of the initial sort of misunderstanding that then lays the groundwork for what is to come.
Yeah, and I really like those little interactions that steadily become sillier, but even more grounded in a way. It's so odd how these happenstances form around him, and he just gets dropped neatly into these situations because of the way he engages with people. I like the way when he first gets to the house. Everyone thinks he's really funny because he's talking about the lift as if it's...
the elevator.
The elevator as if it's like this crazy moving room that he's going to be in for a while.
Yeah, the first time... he meets Eve because they accidentally back into him. Like her limo driver backs into him on the road and squishes his leg in between a parked car and their limo. And so they take him home. And they put him in the wheelchair and then get him in an elevator. And this is the first time in an elevator. And so he says, quite literally to the servant operating the elevator, "I've never been in one of these." And of course, the elevator operator assumes he means the wheelchair.
Yeah.
Okay, because people take elevators all the time. But of course, Chance actually means the elevator, and that's just one example of these literal things that Chance says that are misattributed by the people around him because they attribute something to him that isn't true, but is an attribute created from their perception.
Yeah, and that carries on throughout the film, and it's such a wonderful way to make a character fit this absurdity that he finds himself in, but he has no knowledge of it because he hasn't got that consciousness to be able to deal with these things.
Yeah.
I like the relationship that he starts to form with the Rand, the older. What's his
Benjamin
surname?
Rand.
Benjamin Rand, the older gentleman who's wife to Eve, who's
played by Melvin Douglas.
Yeah, and he's very, very good in the film. He's this kind of mentor to Chance, and he starts talking to him about independent businesses because he talks to him about gardening and what he wants to do, and again this misunderstanding happens because of the literal nature of the way.
Yeah, they take it as a metaphor, his talk about gardening and tending the garden and stuff. They take that as.
And when we meet the president, So he's been there. He's been invited to stay for a few days, and he's not encroaching on anyone. People like him being there because he's this breath of fresh air. He's blunt and to the point, but with so much that
he's
can be
nice and
misread.
smiling and just like
Yeah,
affable.
and kind and affable. Says thank you to everybody for everything they do. He's particularly happy when people feed him or give him drinks of some kind because he simply doesn't know how to do that himself.
Yeah,
So whenever he's brought a meal, he's ecstatic about it. But the bit which really I was like, oh, this is really funny, was when Jack Warden, I think it is, who plays the president.
yeah,
He's great in a lot of films of that era. He plays all kinds of wonderful characters. But he's invited to Benjamin's house, and they're very good friends, and he seeks his guidance. And in the background, like the doctor who's helped him, there's a little bit there. It's like I don't quite know who this guy is. So he's gone to his room to try
yeah.
and
He's
search
starting to
around
catch
a
on.
bit.
Yeah,
A little bit, yeah, and by this time, of course, Benjamin's already introduced Chance to the president, and Chance has given what the president thinks is this glorious analogy for the comic situation in America at the time.
yeah,
And all he's really done is talked about gardening again.
yeah.
Now there's spring and there's summer, and things grow in the
It's
spring
basically
and
a
summer.
platitude. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you get
and
spring,
then in the
then
winter,
yeah, and
autumn,
then comes the winter, and then comes spring again when we get growth again, and they take that as
things
like
die, things grow.
economic optimism that no, we should just let sort of the economy rebound itself or whatever. Like things will be all right, you know.
Yeah, and it kind of blows his mind, the president.
Yeah.
He sat there for a minute, he's like, okay, and then Benjamin's, I think what my learned young friend is trying to say. And from there, the president adopts this vernacular that's been given to him, this allegory, and runs with it in this national speech.
Yeah,
Even quoting who this guy is, even though not knowing who he is at all. This kind of newly created person who's just managed to appear amongst the most powerful men in the country. I really like that. Again,
yeah.
this happenstance,
And also, of course, there's because Chance sees the way the president and Ben interact with each other. So the way they shake hands, and he hears Ben calling the president Bobby rather than Mr. President, right? So like he mirrors that. So he takes the same handshake that Ben does when he shakes hand with the president, and he also calls him "Hey Bobby." And of course, the president takes that as an assertion of dominance and authority.
Yeah. And it's not at all. He's just
No,
copying. As
yeah,
he's done
precisely.
throughout.
It's
Like
just
half the
mimicry.
time all these opportunities start springing up from that meeting, don't
Yeah.
they? He gets a phone call from the Washington Post about
Yeah, and he
what
doesn't
is
understand how the phone works.
he doesn't
either.
understand
Yeah.
the phone works. So, and then he's holding the phone and he's watching an exercise video on
Yeah.
TV that he's seen before, and he's starting to do the motions of the exercise video, and then he's called up to appear on this talk show, and he's like, "Yeah, okay."
And that's where he
I'll
talks in like
go on a talk show.
the same like complete platitudes, but people eat it up as these profound, deeply thought out philosophies
Yeah,
that are deeply meaningful simply because of like the air that he exudes and the perception that has been created around him of him being this sort of economic financial guru or whatever.
yeah, and he's got no doubts because his condition and his childlike nature doesn't provide him that. So he says these things gently, but with truth.
Yeah.
And that truth comes across as perceived by other people as confidence. And it's not at all. And the interview is brilliant. And what I have to say, Hal Ashby is as a director, establishes a very nice, gentle pace. But in particular, as a motif, I like the way he uses the television as not just this window to a world that Chance can't experience otherwise. But after the interview, we don't see him on set. We see Chance watching himself along with other people, watching through the television again once the program is being aired live.
Yeah.
And the funny part is that, as you said, the same platitudes, etc. And the audience is eating up, the interviewer is eating it up. But he gets bored like 3/4 in and turns it over and turns it back to cartoons. It's like so cool because, again, exactly what a child would do. I'm bored of this. I'll just flip over and go back to the other thing. It's a great comment on the way media perceives and reinterprets. And that reinterpretation or re-representation becomes something else. And we see that a lot. The juxtaposition of things against one another, creating that different meaning. And this is a character that certainly has that in abundance in the way he's perceived by the media.
I think what I really appreciate about the film as well is that even though it is sort of comedic and in some ways ridiculous, it is also enormously grounded.
Yeah.
Like the decay of Benjamin Rand and his own sort of coming to terms with his mortality is handled really well, I thought.
Yeah.
Like and Shirley Maclaine as Eve is as you mentioned, it's another standout performance in the film. I think alongside Sellers even like as Eve. Yeah, I mean she's absolutely gorgeous in this movie. Yeah, I really appreciate the way it grounds itself in its own reality, and makes it relatable in that way. That there's still a serious tone there, even with the satire, and because that makes the satire even more effective.
Well, Chance hasn't got that mental wall that's put up
Yeah,
where emotion is checked or anything else is checked. So when he's talking to Ben, he's being very blunt. You're dying. You're a
yeah,
dying man. Oh, you look much better today, Ben. And there's that bond between them, and it only steadily grows as they get to know each other more, or they think they do. Certainly, Ben thinks he is. And the relationship, between Shirley MacLaine's character Eve and Ben and Chance grow and grow and grow to where really Ben wants the best for Eve, and he sees the best as this kind new man who's come into his life, Chance, and so they grow closer together as well.
yeah. And of course, there's that moment when the doctor learns the truth about Chance and who he really is, where he really comes from, and he's about to tell Ben, as Ben is sort of on the precipice of actually dying from his disease. And Ben then tells him, since Chauncey's come in, he's been a tremendous comfort, and he's actually made it easier for me to face the concept of dying. And that's when the doctor then makes the determination that, okay, I'm gonna let Ben stay in the delusion of who Chance is, and I'm going to indulge this delusion and this perception of him as this guru or genius or whatever, and not just the gardener.
The simple gardener, yeah.
And
I
I mean,
really like. You know what I thought the funniest parts in the film were actually were just before that bit when Chance is in
at
bed.
the embassy or no, yeah, no, yeah, in bed, yeah,
Chance is in bed
with
and
Eve,
he's
yeah.
watching TV, and Shirley MacLaine, she's already kissed him in the hallway, and he didn't really know what to do.
Yeah,
And then he's in bed eating his breakfast, watching TV. I think he's watching another kids program,
he's watching a Mr.
and
Rogers.
Mr.
Yeah.
Rogers episode, yeah. And Shirley MacLaine Eve comes in, and in a nightie, and sits on the edge of the bed and is flirting with him, and then just leans over and knocks everything down and starts kissing him, and he's still trying to peek around her
Yeah.
to look at Mr. Rogers because that's what he wants. Oh, and even at the party, sorry, prior to that, which links in, he likes to watch. That's what he says
Yeah.
to him. So, what do you want to do? And he says, I like to watch. And there's this gay politician who's like talking to him and get quite invested in him. Because he's been sent rather than Ben, because Ben's too ill to go with Evie to this big ambassadorial or senatorial party. And he just says, I just like to watch. And this guy's like, I'll go and get Brian or whoever it is, as if they're going to perform the sex act in front of him, when he just wants to watch TV.
Yeah.
Those absurd moments are so really, really set out well in the film. And
And
the
of course,
little motifs
that
they
same
continue.
joke is repeated with Shirley MacLaine later, where she tries to have sex with him, and she realizes, and he doesn't react at all. And she's like, "Oh, I don't know what you like. I like to watch." Oh, and then she masturbates in front of him, and of course, he doesn't. She doesn't know because she's rather caught up in the act of masturbating. But he's not watching her at all. He's watching the television again.
Yeah, while doing a handstand.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm just going to do a handstand because it feels fun at the time,
Yeah.
because I want to watch TV upside down. That seems like a good idea to me. So yeah, he's such a nice-natured character who makes everyone around him feel really good. And I think one of the charms of Chance, lovely alliteration, is that he cuts through people's problematic emotional states and their complexities, because by his nature he simplifies, and he makes those around him feel like they understand the world, I think.
Yeah.
And that's why the gardening analogy works so well throughout the film. It's so simple, and yet it endears everybody. And
Yeah,
kind of gets
precisely. I
them on
mean,
the same page.
it's like exactly like like the quote books and stuff, where you just see a quote outside of context or anything. They're just supposed to be profound and gets marketed and like branded on stuff and whatnot as a platitude.
Yeah,
and you hear
well,
in
like
politics,
a horoscope that you can apply to everything. Any horoscope you can.
I mean,
generally
it's also
fix anything.
it's the same kind of platitudes that you hear in politics all the time, right? That are
Mm.
basically just these empty sentences that politicians spout that don't really have any meaning. They sound meaningful, but really they're inherently empty.
And that's one of the great parts where the satire is just so working so effectively, taking what a politician is and really reducing their words to the hollow machinations of what they usually are. They don't mean anything. They're just platitudes upon platitudes to make people feel better, when really behind the scenes things are probably a shit show.
Yeah, and also, I mean, also just to, again, goes back to perception. Like we see all the time, especially in like the past couple of decades with the rise of like broadcast news, like 24-hour news networks, where you see a lot of talking heads on the news networks that get presented as experts or whatever. Like he's an expert on something or something or something, and he's basically just a talking head who's supposed to be talking about a particular subject. And so the news already attribute a credibility and a perception of credibility to that person, even if they're not necessarily deserving of it. Like not every talking head on television is equal. Some of them are pretty empty. And yeah, it's just like I mean, to go to the ending, Ben does die, and then there's the funeral, where Chance then walks off during the eulogy. He's eulogized by the president, and Chance then walks off to the park, and then starts walking across the lake, walking on water, as Ben eulogizes. Or as the president eulogizes Ben with the sentence, "Life is a state of mind. That perception is everything." And once again, it's the Chance is able to walk on water in that scene because Chance doesn't know the limits of physical law, because Chance's reality is shaped by television. So in his mind, it is possible to walk on water. It's possible to do just about anything, because he doesn't have the concept of understanding of the laws of physics or anything that we have. Like those limitations, just like he doesn't have the concept of social limitations either. So yeah, I mean, in that is basically the driving point of the film. Life is a state of mind. Perception shapes reality. Perception shapes everything in terms of how we relate to life and how we relate to people and how we relate to reality.
Yeah, and that's never so more important than right now.
Precisely.
You know, in the context of the world we live in right now. I mean, there are some other really nice moments in the film and interesting moments. There's a moment when he's during the interview on TV that he's watching, and we're getting cut away to different people. We cut to Louise again for the first time, who was the maid who helped him and brought him up and gave him lunch. And she's
in a retirement home.
Yeah, I cannot believe this dumb kid I brought up from that high is on TV spouting stuff about economics. This is a white man's world. This is you can clearly see, look at what this guy's done. He's stupid, and yet he's, now this power broker at the top of the political echelons in Washington. And again,
of course, because especially at the funeral, you hear the pallbearers who carry Ben's coffin are talking about who's going to replace the next president, who are we going to set up as the next president. And then, of course, somebody says, what about Chauncey Gardner? And Chauncey Gardner
we don't know anything
set up
about
to
him.
Possibly be the next
But
president.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
There's no background on him. There's nothing to be dragged up, and these little nuggets of truth that perforate almost every element of the film are so wonderfully woven in and given extra gravitas by the actions we see. Yeah, it's just such a wonderfully prophetic film, considering it was made in '79.
Yeah, I mean, it's 40 years old.
Exactly, and it's talking about things which are more
Completely
prevalent than they ever were before. I find it interesting as well that we have this little motif throughout the film. Whenever anyone asks him about reading newspapers, like he's being eulogized in the press, and his comments.
I don't read, he says, and then nobody reads anymore. Yeah, because I mean, of course, in their mind, it's impossible that he doesn't know how to read. It's just that he doesn't want to read.
Yeah, because he hasn't got the time. He's so busy. So many things going on in his life. I don't write. Oh, we'll get a ghostwriter in to write a book for you. It's fine. Don't worry. It's what everyone does. Yeah, I can't say enough about how effective this film is at discussing perception and re-representation in an era in which that is basically what our lives are.
Yeah.
Everything is represented to us. Everything is a
On social
choice.
media, on like how we present
Yeah,
ourselves, how we create a perception there. Yeah.
the echo chamber that you have surrounding you, which only
Yeah.
perpetuates your own opinions and viewpoints. Not necessarily, stepping out of that is always very important, but this film shines a nice big light on those things and makes it very overt for people to understand how it can be easily manipulated
Yeah.
just with a simple headline or image.
Yeah, I really recommend finding it and looking it up. I mean, it's it does require you to it does require a degree of concentration and focus. It
Yeah.
runs about 2 hours, so it's not really a casual film as such. It is a film that you have to engage with in that way.
Yeah, and as I said before, it's not. I mean, for those who like raucous comedy or those who like things with pace, or it's not
It's
that.
not an
It's
Adam Sandler movie, no. Yeah,
no, no, no. It's far more thoughtful. It's far more slow burning. It's far more
cerebral.
situational
Yeah.
and cerebral than a lot of modern, or not say modern comedies, but that type of comedy is. This is a totally different type of comedy, and I really appreciated it. Really, really did.
Yeah, I think it's some of the most clever satire I've ever seen, and like just the writing in it is really really solid. Um, yeah, I mean, I heard it's ironic. It's based on a novel by a Polish writer, and I haven't looked into it too deeply, but I've heard that he basically got into a bit of the same trouble that the Chance did, where he sort of got revealed for maybe not having sort of being deserving of the accolades that were put on him, and maybe created a certain perception
That's
himself.
really interesting, and
Um,
applying that to a different culture, but a culture he'll have seen through television, no doubt.
yeah,
That's really interesting. Well, I definitely recommend people, if you're a Sellers fan, I mean, this is something I'd never come across before. And I
yeah.
know you've
It's
mentioned it
a. I
to me
mean,
before, but
I think probably the closest you get is his role in Lolita.
right, yeah, okay.
Um, because I mean, it's a serious dramatic performance. Really, it's not. He
Yeah.
doesn't play it comedically, Sellers. He just
Oh
plays
no,
it
very, very,
earnestly. Yeah.
yeah, just like Rain Man in many ways. Hoffman plays that character as he should, very, very seriously, and it's not a comedy, in the same way this is, or a satire, but it's a performance which takes the particular mental state, autistic tendencies of the character, and plays them as it should be played. It's just everybody else is the absurdity around him, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if you do want to watch it, I mean, I found it on Amazon Prime to rent, and it was a really good copy. Well, it wasn't bad copy. Certainly after Escape from Cyberport, which was terrible. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know where they get some of their copies from Prime, but bloody hell. But yeah, this one was only 3.49 in England, so give it a watch. And if you're a Sellers fan, it's actually a really lovely way to if you're a really big Sellers fan, if you followed him throughout his career and you've seen his wonderfully absurd comedies, it's actually a really nice way to end his career, to be his last film.
Yeah, also because this was a passion project for Sellers. Like he tried to make this movie for a very long time and get this movie made. Um,
And it took until he had that kind of gravitas within, Hollywood to be able to maybe bring those actors and
yeah,
directors in to
probably.
fulfill it. That's really interesting. Okay, well, I thought it was great, and I can't ask enough people to go out and give it a check, especially in the current climate of the world, because it makes more sense than ever, given how
Yeah,
old it is.
yeah. I mean, life is a state of mind.
That'll stick with me for a while. It's a fortune cookie, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. I mean that is sort of again that is that sort of profound uh like well I forget the name with the word with P platitude
Yeah,
that like the gardening stuff, right?
yeah, exactly the kind
Like
of things you find in a
yeah.
fortune cookie. Right, well, please go and watch Being There. I think it's a wonderful film. I'd never seen it before. It's made in 1979, directed by Hal Ashby, and yeah, just go and watch it. Go and find it on Prime and give it a watch and talk to us about it. Talk to us in the comments if you've seen the film before. Uh, it's one I think you should get into. I'll be watching it again at some point. I think it's one of those films that
And
the
also,
performance on its own is good
yeah, I
enough.
mean, also if nothing else, Shirley Maclaine looks magical
Oh,
in this.
yeah, and she's absolutely stunning. And she's great performance wise. The way she reacts and interacts with the other characters,
Yeah,
especially Chance, is really great. It's a heartwarming film. I feel in a good because I watched it just before the podcast,
yeah.
and I feel in a really good mood. So now I'm going to change your mood, Silver, because you know
Looking
what this
forward
month
to it.
is, and you know my particular appetite for this genre of film. It's
Yeah,
October, baby. Halloween is on its way. This will probably get aired at the end of the month, I would imagine, given the few we've got to put up first. But I didn't want to go too obscure, but I did want to go old and original. We're going to watch William Friedkin's 1973 The Exorcist, written by William Peter Blatty. I haven't seen it in a little while, but it's one of those films that has slowly but surely become a bit, I don't know, it's disappeared a little bit from some people's minds.
has it?
A little bit, yeah. Like, especially, obviously I'm a teacher,
I
so
mean, it
students.
might very well have. You would know better than I do.
It's just it's still very iconic. But
Yeah,
there's a lot of people out there who have never come across it before, and I didn't want to go for the obvious Halloween, Shining, etc. So I thought, let's go back to the one. Let's face it, it's just as much an art house movie as it is a terrifyingly absurd horror at times. And I've had incredibly funny moments with it, and which you'll hear on my next podcast. Actually, I talked about a cinema trip I did with that particular film. We've got a special coming up where we talk about our love for cinema, where it comes from, all those silly films. That'll be a little bit later down the line. But yeah, The Exorcist, baby. Let's hit Halloween hard.
yeah. Looking forward to that.
Okay, so this has been Last Edit Podcast. We thank you so much for joining us each week as we continue to delve into more and more crazy films. And we will see you very, very soon.
Take care, and remember, life is a state of mind.